It's called a Pledge to America. We were among those who encouraged the GOP to include social issues in the document, and they did. Today we'll offer an honest assessment of what made it in. This is the Citizen Link Report. Hi, I'm Stuart Shepard along with Tom Minnery, our Senior Vice President of Government and Public Policy. Hi, Tom.
Hello, Stuart.
Tom, I want to quote first a line from the preamble that sets the stage for all this. We pledge to honor families, traditional marriage, life, and the private and faith-based organizations that form the core of our American values. What do you think?
Well, it's marriage is in there, barely. It is a pledge. They pledge themselves to honor traditional marriage, and this is called the Pledge to America. That's about all it says about marriage, but it's enough for people like us to remind them, look, you pledged to honor marriage. Now is the time. So there will be a day coming when they've got to live up to that.
Now, the life issue does get a couple of more specific mentions once you get down further in the document. This one's in the section about repealing and replacing health care. It reads, we will permanently end taxpayer funding of abortion and codify the Hyde Amendment. First, what's the Hyde Amendment? What does that mean?
The Hyde Amendment prevents federal funds from being used to pay for abortions. Before this great expansive health care reform, the Hyde the Hyde Amendment was enough to take care of the problem. But with the health care reform, they've opened many new pipelines that will allow abortions to be paid for. So if they broaden the coverage of the Hyde Amendment, they will have done something very substantial, particularly if they make it permanent, because now the Hyde Amendment has to be renewed every year. If they make it permanent and apply it to all government funds, that will be a wonderful step forward.
Another section talks about the executive order that President Obama signed in private at the White House that was purported to keep taxpayer money from funding abortion. The pledge calls that document, quote, inadequate.
Well, it was inadequate, and we could spend 10 minutes here giving you the convoluted reasoning why abortions will be paid for, even though the president's executive order says they will not. It's a little bit devious, and this document by the Republicans will take care of the problem if they make good on it.
I still occasionally hear from people who say, why do you keep saying there's taxpayer funding of abortion in health care? We all know that's not true. This document would appear from the GOP to once again affirm that, yep, it's in there and there need to be steps taken to get rid of it.
Well, it is. So, well, here you go. You know, you've gone and done it. I'm going to explain how abortion is in there. First of all, there are community health centers around the country, and money that's used to pay for community health centers through state agencies will be allowed to pay for abortions. In fact, several states that have submitted plans for funding under this new money for their community health centers have put abortion funding in those plans, and the Obama administration approved them. But then when the National Right to Life organization called them on it and said, hey, wait a minute, you said no abortions, and they backtracked and took the abortions out of there. But there's another way. Starting in about 2013, if this healthcare reform continues, people who get a subsidized plan, and many of us will be doing that, we'll have to write not only a check for the healthcare part of it, but also a separate check for the healthcare part of it. Why two checks? That second check goes into a separate pool that will be used to pay for abortions. See, the one check is for the federal subsidy. The separate check is another check. They're not calling that federal money, no federal subsidy, but exactly is what it is. It's hard to, if you think you understand it, you're missing something. It's a dodge is what it is, Stuart, and that is what the Republicans want to remove.
Now, we mentioned at the top that the marriage is mentioned in the preamble to this. I'd like to have a discussion about marriage in the document, but other than a couple of passing references to the marriage penalty tax and how that's going to be coming back under the Democrats in Congress, there's no mention of marriage. What do you make of that? What would the discussion be about the lack of marriage in the document?
Well, first of all, I'm concerned about it. The Republican National Party platform has a gracious statement about the value of a mom and dad in a traditional marriage. I wish they'd have taken that and put that gracious statement in this document. I'm glad they mentioned something about marriage, but the fact is, Stuart, Republicans in Washington are scared of this issue. I had someone from John Boehner's office, he's the minority leader, one of the guys in charge of writing this Pledge to America, said, we are scared of this issue in the Beltway. And I said, we'll probably be putting some pressure on you if we don't see anything about marriage in there. He says, please put pressure on us. We need it. So,
why fear? I mean, what's there to be afraid of the marriage issue? Most people in America are married.
It's an ugly issue. The opponents, the gay activists, will call you hateful, homophobic, right-wing, fanatical, and the Washington Post and the New York Times editorials will call you something less than that, but not much less than that, although they'll do it more politely. And the big Eastern media have an overwhelming presence in that town, unfortunately.
Now, as you were just mentioning, the original plan, as we understand it, for A Pledge to America was only going to include fiscal and economic issues. This is the year of the economy. We're still struggling with that. And there was pressure then placed on Republicans, particularly in the House, to include marriage, life, and other social issues in the document. They did eventually, but part of what this illustrates, I think, is this year the election cycle is characterized by an honest-to-goodness grassroots uprising. People across America are wanting to speak into the system because they feel their values are being ridden roughshod over by the Democrats in charge of the House, Senate, and the White House. But yet they're finding themselves in conflict with the Washington establishment, even on the conservative side, and there's a dynamic tension there. Help us understand what's happening with that. Do you see a shift taking place?
Well, first of all of us, we who are social conservatives as well as many people who are simply economic conservatives, are sort of all Tea Party members now because the overwhelming problem is excess spending in the government, and that has to be taken care of. So I can see why there is an overwhelming focus on economic and tax issues. It's a safer issue. You don't have the rabid objection as you do with the marriage issue. And they did, as I said before, they gave us enough on marriage for us to hold them accountable when they needed to be held accountable. And that day is coming because obviously a marriage is under attack in the courts. There's a defense of marriage law that prevents states without same-sex marriage from having to recognize same-sex marriages performed in other states. That law has been held unconstitutional by one federal district court in Massachusetts, so it does not apply to the whole country. But if that is upheld at a higher court and eventually the Supreme Court, then any state that disallows its own state from performing same-sex marriages will have to recognize those performed elsewhere, and we'll have national same-sex marriage. So there is a threat coming. I'm not sure what the legislative solution yet is. Obviously the best solution is a federal marriage amendment, but I have to tell you, even the conservatives in Congress don't have the stomach to put God's definition of marriage in the U.S. Constitution. That's a fight for a later day, but that fight is coming.
All right, we've gone digging into the innards, if you will, of the Pledge to America. As you step back and look at it as a whole, what's the takeaway? What do you think about this document?
Oh, it's a good document. It's plain writing. It's rather long, 20, 30 pages of text, but it's easy to read. It puts into simple terms, understandable rhetoric, the problems that we've been talking about many times throughout the weeks since President Obama has been inaugurated. People ought to get the document. They ought to read it. They will understand a lot. They'll understand some surprising things. For example, I did not know that the federal government now spends $7 million every moment around the clock, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and 41 cents of every dollar is borrowed money, much of it borrowed from foreign countries. That's not healthy. It's explained very carefully and very cleanly in this document. It's worth reading.
Yeah, we'll include a link to that. If you look in the summary that goes along with this video, there'll be a link there that will say, here's a link to the Pledge to America, and you can read it for yourself if you want. Tom, thank you, and thank you for watching. We always enjoy getting your comments. Let us know what you think about A Pledge to America. You may write to us at mail@citizenlink.com. We encourage you to pray for our elected officials and for our nation as we come up on the election here the first Tuesday in November. Make sure you're registered to vote, as many states are coming up on the deadline for registering as we get closer to the election. And remember, stand tall and be heard.